Hello and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Stephen Minter and I'm a proud City Club member and I get to do this again. I'm also a former board member of Dominion, one of this country's largest energy companies. During my time on the board, I had the opportunity to work with and observe firsthand one of Dominion's most admired and effective leaders. And today I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to introduce Tom Farrell, the Chairman, President, and CEO of Dominion Resources. All of us with a gas bill in Northeast Ohio are likely familiar with Dominion. It was in 2000 that this company acquired Consolidated Natural Gas and its major subsidiary, better known in our community and sometimes still referred to as East Ohio Gas. That acquisition made Dominion one of the largest producers and transporters of energy, and not just natural gas. In Northeast Ohio alone, the company serves more than 1 million residential and business customers. Dominion operates in a complex global marketplace. Around the world, growing demand for energy is running headlong into concerns about climate change. Our weather patterns appear to be growing less predictable and more extreme. A polar vortex results in us using more natural gas to heat our homes. A heat wave results in more natural gas used to create electricity to run our air conditioners. And while we're becoming more efficient, in the end, we're all using more energy than we used to. It's not just complex consumer behavior, though. Global trade patterns and energy usage patterns are creating unprecedented shifts in how energy is delivered. Evidence of that is Dominion's investment in their Chesapeake Bay facility, where they are preparing to enter the liquefied natural gas export market. All of this is what makes Tom Farrell's job both challenging and, I would venture, Tom, exciting. Mr. Farrell has nearly 20 years' experience in a variety of senior leadership positions at Dominion and has run this Fortune 500 company for the last 7 years. He is a leader in the national utility industry and a volunteer leader in state higher education and civic endeavors in Richmond and in the state of Virginia. And I would tell you he's true Virginian, gone to the University of Virginia, undergraduate, with his law degree from there also. He serves on the board of Edison Electric Institute, the association that represents all U.S.-owned electric companies, and was its chairman from 2011 to 2012. He also serves as chairman of the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, the Virginia Business Council, and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. He is the presiding director at the present time of Altria Group, Incorporated. In 2012, Mr. Farrell was named Utility CEO of the Year by Energy Biz magazine. Now, there are a couple of more nuggets I want to share about Tom. He is strongly committed to Dominion, being a responsible corporate citizen and giving back to its local communities. At the company's most recent annual meeting held in Cleveland, a sizable contribution was made towards the establishment of Fisher House, similar to Ronald McDonald House. Fisher House, for military families, will be located on the grounds of the Lewis Stokes Veterans Administration Hospital. The Dominion Foundation, well known in this community, contributes over $1 million annually to causes in Northeast Ohio, including the City Club of Cleveland. Tom Farrell is also committed to supporting veterans who sacrifice for our country. He is a corporate leader who stresses job opportunities for veterans within the company. This comes naturally, for he is a member of a distinguished family with military backgrounds. Tom's grandfather's career in the United States Army spanned World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. Major General Thomas Farrell was deputy commander of the Manhattan Project and many other crucial projects in the military sphere. And he also had a very distinguished career as a person in building major projects in this country. His sons were exceptional military leaders. Tom's father graduated from West Point. Perhaps, then, this is a partial explanation for his latest endeavor. Besides his role as a corporate chieftain, he gets up, I learned, at the right hours of the night. He ventured into the motion pictures industry as both a screenwriter and a producer. An avid fan of history who was raised in a military family, he co-wrote and produced the new Civil War drama, Field of Lost Shoes. This is the true story of 7 young cadets from the Virginia Military Institute who were swept into the Battle of New Market, Virginia in 1864, along with 250 other VMI cadets, ranging in age from 15 to 25. The release of the movie coincides with the 150th anniversary of the Battle of New Market. And so in September, when we go and see it, we can say, we hobnobbed with Mr. Farrell. Mr. Farrell's focus today will be on the changing energy landscape here in Ohio and throughout the nation and the world as a result of the recent extraordinary growth in America's so-called unconventional oil and natural gas resource base. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the City Club of Cleveland, Chairman, President, and CEO of Dominion, screenwriter and movie producer, Tom Farrell.
Thank you, Steve. I very much appreciate that kind introduction. You can tell, I think, from Steve's understanding of the energy markets and what makes it tick and how it affects northeastern Ohio, why he was such a crucial member of our board and a key player in the merger that created the largest integrated utility in the United States, which it remains today, integrated between an electric utility and natural gas utility. Steve is a great credit to the city of Cleveland, as you all know, and this club in particular. And I'm quite honored to be here. I know the long and storied history of this city club, and it's an intimidating list of speakers who have come before me. I was going to speak about energy, but since Steve mentioned the movie, and we finished the cost part, but now we're moving to the revenue part. I'd be happy to speak about how you can buy tickets, download, DVD sales, fieldoflostshoesfilm.com. Go there. Just kidding. Actually, that's true. He mentioned my love of history. I do spend a lot of time reading history. I read a lot of military history, but today I want to talk just a little bit about what's going on in the energy markets and understanding a little bit of the energy history in the United States, I think, might be instructive as to our future. For a long time, our company has been an energy importer. Since the 1970s in particular, when the oil production peaked and OPEC's embargo sent shockwaves through our economy, the American public and our policymakers have viewed energy as an albatross, even a strategic liability. For those of us who saw it, who could forget President Carter speaking from the Oval Office in his cardigan, urging the American people to turn down their thermostats? We must face the fact that the energy shortage is permanent, President Carter said. His Secretary of Energy, the first Secretary of Energy, James Schlesinger, said this: "The energy future is bleak in the decades ahead. We must rapidly adjust our economics to a condition of chronic stringency in traditional energy supplies." That assessment of bleak and constrained energy future captures the way most Americans have thought about energy for many decades. It can be summed up in 3 words: scarcity, vulnerability, and dependence. Not exactly words that conjure up the John Wayne ideal of American independence and self-reliance. Still, that mindset of scarcity was justified. Our nation has long had an insatiable thirst for reasonably priced and plentiful energy. Our ever-rising demand has required us to enter into some questionable alliances and problematic international commitments over the past 50 years. If nothing else, our collective experience over that time has taught us one thing. The United States had become dangerously dependent on foreign sources of energy, especially oil. And I think it's fair to say that that realization has had a major influence on America's outlook on energy security, foreign policy, domestic politics, and even our level of optimism about the future. As recently as 2003, a Time magazine headline declared that the U.S. was, quote, running out of energy. Then something dramatic happened, all within the past decade. And now we're talking about the United States as the new Middle East. Our term I heard 2 weeks ago, Saudi America. That something has caught us largely by surprise, and it has turned the world of energy upside down. It has been referred to variously as a boom, bonanza, breakthrough, renaissance, and revolution. I'm talking about hydraulic fracturing, commonly referred to as fracking, which along with the words selfie and hashtag has been added to the latest edition of Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. Fracking is behind the huge new supplies of oil and natural gas being tapped from shale rock formations across the continent. A lot of the story is about oil. I'm going to talk about gas today because our company is in the gas business and I know a little bit more about that than I do about oil. Gas infrastructure business. Suffice to say that on just about every front, this turnaround has been dramatic and virtually unimaginable, even just a decade ago. The growing abundance of recoverable domestic natural gas, in fact, is reshaping our energy policy on many fronts. Consumers in the economy have benefited from lower energy costs. The manufacturing sector is reviving and returning businesses to our shores, bringing more job growth and investment. Energy imports are declining, improving the balance of trade. Greenhouse gases and other emissions have declined a lot in the last 5 years because we're using more natural gas to produce electricity. And exports of natural gas will be the next valuable complement to our country's diplomatic toolbox, providing strategic assistance to our allies. Historically speaking, stunning, world-altering, natural resource-driven events of this type are actually far from unique. Gold was found in 1848 in California. 300,000 people flocked to the West so they could pan for the precious yellow nuggets. East Texas, 1901, the Spindletop gusher shot oil 150 feet in the air, kicking off the Texas oil boom, created Gulf Oil and Texaco, now Chevron Corporation. Today, the same phenomenon is being repeated in North Dakota, in Oklahoma, in Pennsylvania, and yes, right here in Ohio. And as before, we're moving quickly to take advantage of what constitutes an historic opportunity. But there is a big difference this time. This time, the American public has received the news not only with different opinions, but with different interpretations of reality. From my perspective, this is a promising moment in the course of American history, a story of innovation, ingenuity, and people with light in their eyes who desire to make something happen. And I might add, it was not the great global energy companies that did this, nor did the new drilling techniques come from a single breakthrough. It took smaller, scrambling, independent oil and gas firms. They took the lead and they took all the risk. They experimented. They built on drilling techniques that have been around for decades, though not perfected. They've been fracturing porous rock since the 1940s, but it wasn't until the 80s, really, that they began to perfect the fracking techniques that are used today. The result? Something truly astounding. A fundamental change on the basis of available resources in global geopolitical circumstances. The have-not, the United States, is rapidly becoming the have. And that should be good news. But let me express it in a slightly different way. After decades of scarcity, vulnerability, and dependence, what if someone showed up and announced a new domestic source of energy, putting substantially less carbon into the atmosphere, generating incredible amounts of new revenue for the American economy, thousands of new jobs for American workers, and new prosperity for American communities? Would that not be received as good news? In today's America, perhaps not, at least not by all. At this point, we see many Americans expressing ambivalence, if not outright hostility, to fracking. It's almost as if in the gold rush they'd said, no, don't go get that gold. Just leave it in the ground. And that is precisely the sentiment expressed by some of today's environmentalists who adamantly oppose any further development of our natural gas resources. Leave them in the ground. Get beyond natural gas. Use clean, green, carbon-free energy sources to provide 100% of our energy needs, and do it now. Well, that's a perfectly fine sentiment if you are not concerned about the laws of physics and economics and keeping the lights on and energy bills reasonable, which the public universally favors the last time I checked. Do not get me wrong. Of course, we want to minimize the environmental impacts of energy production, and natural gas has the smallest carbon footprint of all fossil fuels. But we must also get the job done reliably, affordably, and at a scale sufficient to deliver what our homes and businesses require 24 hours a day, every day of the year. Price, abundance, reliability. Those are the things that make natural gas today's fuel of choice, and also why renewable energy sources such as wind and solar remain niche players and will for the foreseeable future. The opposition to fracking is heartfelt and intense in many cases, and it has to be dealt with in an unambiguous commitment to safety and transparency. That commitment must exceed rhetoric. You must deliver it truthfully. Here in Ohio, growing numbers of people define fracking not as something bad, but as income from land leases, well-paying jobs, local economic rebirth. For them, fracking is an economic godsend. A place like Youngstown, long lamented as a symbol of industrial decline, now has wind in its sails. South of Canton, in Carroll County, there's an extended stay hotel there. You can get a reservation, but not until 2017. In truth, all of eastern Ohio is benefiting from the region's two major shale gas formations, the Utica and the Marcellus. We started hearing about the Marcellus Shale about 10 years ago. It is an enormous gas deposit that covers 100,000 square miles, mostly in Pennsylvania and New York, but also reaching into eastern Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, and even small parts of Virginia. Estimates of the Marcellus resource base continue to evolve, but I have read that if the Marcellus were a country, it would rank 8th in the world in terms of natural gas production, ahead of Saudi Arabia. It currently produces about 12 billion cubic feet of gas per day, close to 20% of total U.S. production. 20% from the Marcellus Shale. Last year, 6 years ago, 0 came out of the Marcellus Shale. The Utica Shale lies several thousand feet below the Marcellus. Its geographic reach is actually much greater, stretching much further into Ohio and including 8 states, plus some of the Great Lakes, Ontario, and the province of Quebec. Geologists are only now beginning to understand the Utica, but if the formation proves to be commercially viable throughout its expanse, it will be the largest gas reserve formation in the world. According to 2012 data, the Marcellus and Utica shales together held proven reserves of 52 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Put those numbers in context. The Gulf of Mexico, the traditional source of most natural gas. Marcellus and Utica, 52 trillion. The Gulf of Mexico, 9 trillion. In terms of production, the experts now predict that between the Marcellus and Utica formations, the two deposits they're going to yield about $20 billion of gas per day 5 years from now. That's 2/3 more than they're producing today. In eastern Ohio, drilling activity really only started in 2011. According to one analysis I read, in 2011 was the peak drilling in Pennsylvania, 2,000 wells drilled. In Ohio, that same year, 35 wells drilled. But by the time you get to 2013, 600 wells were drilled in 2013 in East Ohio, and 1,000 were given new permits. The point is this: there's a tremendous potential for the Buckeye State in this world-class resource. Now, we're not in the production business. We are in the distribution business and the delivery through pipelines along with electric production. Our oldest business is Dominion East Ohio, It was part of the Standard Oil Company, John D. Rockefeller's company. We've been here since 1898. The first interstate pipeline was actually built by this company, crossing the Ohio River between these two neighboring states. East Ohio is our largest gas distribution company. You heard we have 1.2 million customers. We're at present investing $4 billion over a 20-year period to replace a large part of the older infrastructure that was built 50, 60 years ago. And we are very appreciative of the Ohio Public Utility Commission for working with us to allow us to accelerate that program. It's better for our customers, it's better for the environment, because you have the chance of leakage out of the pipes is much reduced. It's a real credit to them that they listened to all the stakeholders, and we were able to accelerate that program. But let me talk about gas and electricity production for a minute. As recently as 2005, coal provided half of the nation's electricity. Last year, less than 40%. So that's 22% decline in about 7 years. 2012 greenhouse gas emissions from the power sector were 15% lower in 2012 than they were in 2005. Among other things, that means the United States has exceeded the pledge that we made in Copenhagen in 2009 to reduce carbon emissions only 12% below 2005 levels. We've already achieved 15%. And we didn't get it done with a big regulatory program or cap and trade. That legislation died in the United States Senate in 2010. The main reasons are twofold. We have had a stagnant economy, and we are using a lot more of a less carbon intensive fuel, natural gas. And we can expect a lot more of that switching as the EPA just issued a rule recently looking for a 30% further decline below 12 levels by 2030. We're doing better, by the way, than Europe on carbon reductions. Most people think Europe leads the way in carbon reductions and management of carbon dioxide emissions. That's not true. The United States is doing better, in fact, much better than Europe in dealing with carbon emissions. Now, whether you are extracting natural resources from the ground, piping natural gas to market, or generating electricity, the work involves inherent dangers and trade-offs. Fracking is a complex, multi-stage process, and it does involve environmental risk. Potential groundwater contamination is a risk. Wastewater disposal that could possibly lead to earthquakes is an issue. Methane leakage from natural gas infrastructure is an issue. But you can make these risks acceptable with procedures and processes that allow no room for error. In our business, public confidence is the coin of the realm. Get that part wrong, even in a minor way, and the cost is prohibitive. Methane is a greenhouse gas that is more intense than carbon dioxide, but it disperses much more quickly than carbon dioxide. So we need more studies to work on methane emissions from wells and infrastructure. Our company is part of a national study that's being done by Colorado State University, which will have a report out on this in the fall. The long and short of this, we have to work through this with goodwill on all sides. Goodwill is a good thing in a country increasingly divided over almost everything. Stalemate is not a means to an end. It is just stalemate. The groups who say no to progress and who engage in magical thinking about energy are making a tragic mistake. To do so is to oversimplify and underestimate the complex realities of modern life, including the enormous scale of the energy required to meet the needs of our economy. Quite simply, if pure and uncompromising perfection is the only acceptable standard, we can all look forward to a stagnant, unproductive world. All forms of energy production, including those from renewable sources, have environmental impacts. No one understands this better than those of us who actually do the work of producing the energy, whether electricity or gas, which is why we have a vested interest in being proactive, in doing it right. Let me provide an example on the electric side. One drawback of renewable energy sources, such as wind and solar, is the large amount of land they require to generate the same amount of power as fossil fuels. Here's an illustration. Dominion owns a solar facility in Connecticut. 30,000 solar panels on 50 acres of land. The facility can generate about 5 megawatts of power. That'll do enough electricity for about 1,200 homes. 50 acres, 1,200 homes. It'll produce power 35% of the time, on average. By comparison, we're building a gas-fired power plant, 1,300 megawatts, on 25 acres of land. 1,300 megawatts, half the amount of land. It will work 85% of the time, provide power to 325,000 homes instead of 1,200. So what this comes down to, we'll use half the amount of land, and we can expect the plant to produce 650 times the amount of electricity as that solar facility. So all of these sources, they're all good sources. Solar is a good source. Wind is a good source. But to think that they all don't have their own environmental footprints is to completely miss the point. Now let's get back to our shale gas story. Creating more transparency about the environmental risks of fracking will help public confidence. We have to have rigorous operational standards and best practices to make sure that we are able to develop this extraordinary resource. People understand the need for secure and affordable energy, but they also need more clarity about the impacts of fracking on their local environments. And our industry, their industry, needs to do more with it. The shale boom for now is a uniquely American phenomenon, but that will not always be the case. Other countries have oil and gas locked in shale formations, but America is currently the only country taking advantage of it. No other place on earth has what the United States has: the capital resources, the engineers, geologists, chemists, a legal system that recognizes landowners' mineral rights, an energy infrastructure system ready and able to deliver the product. Of all the horizontal drilling that's taken place in the last 5 years, 99% of it has been done in the United States. 99%. According to a recent study from Harvard, more than 45,000 oil and gas wells were completed last year within the United States. The rest of the world, not including Canada, Canada does a lot of its own, the rest of the world, fewer than 4,000 wells drilled. This surge has driven gas prices down in the United States by 70% in the last 5 years. And that's great news for American consumers and the American economy. After losing millions of manufacturing jobs to lower-cost overseas locations before and after the Great Recession, American companies are finally coming home, and they're bringing lots of investment and new jobs with them. Daniel Yergin, who's a leading analyst of global energy issues, said we could see more than $100 billion of new investment going to U.S. manufacturing over just the next few years, almost entirely because of the cost advantage of natural gas. Yergin's firm, Cambridge Energy Research Associates, has analyzed the direct and indirect benefits of it, says it will produce at least 725,000 direct jobs and more than 1 million indirect jobs. He said that 2 years ago. That's almost certainly an understated number today. But any way you cut it, it makes sense. When one of the primary costs of production, energy, is reduced, the result is a more competitive United States in the global marketplace. Low-cost natural gas is also driving new foreign investment to our shores. European countries currently pay 3 times as much for natural gas as we do in the United States, and in Asia, 4 times as much. Europe pays 4 times as much for electricity than they pay in the United States. We have an energy advantage we must take advantage of. There are 100 new foreign-owned factories scheduled to open in the United States between now and 2017. It represents $300 billion in increased GDP and 1 million new jobs. And almost all of it is financed with private capital. There are other benefits worth mentioning. The growing abundance of our shale oil and gas resources make the United States less susceptible to being whipsawed by foreign events, unforeseen foreign events, and actions that occur in other parts of the world. Look at what's happening in the Middle East today. I'm not saying we get energy independence out of this. The global economy makes that impractical and probably imprudent. But we do get greater control over our own destiny. We get something else too. The opportunity, first time in a long time, now before us, to shape events beyond our borders. That is what happens when you have the ability to export commodities valued by the marketplace. Just ask OPEC. Within the next couple of years, the United States is expected to produce more natural gas than it consumes. And with natural reserves of natural gas estimated more than 100 years, we are looking at a seismic shift in the world's energy landscape, an extraordinary reversal of fortune. America, a net exporter of energy. By increasing and diversifying the global supply of energy, we will put downward pressure on global gas prices. It will benefit our allies and diminish the influence of Russia, Iran, and other suppliers who threaten global stability. Our company, Dominion, is on the leading edge of this remarkable opportunity. We are in the last stages of securing federal and state permits to transform our Cove Point liquefied natural gas terminal in Maryland, presently an importing facility, into an exporting facility. We've signed 20-year contracts to sell all of our export capacity, 4.6 million tons a year, to 2 customers, both important allies and trading partners of the United States. One is Sumitomo Corporation from Tokyo, which will deliver LNG from Cove Point, Maryland, to 2 major gas utilities, Japanese utilities, serving more than 24 million customers between them. The other firm is GAIL of India, a state-owned gas distribution company, which is the largest in that mammoth country. Dominion we will spend between $3.4 and $3.8 billion on this project. Construction is going to take about 3 years. At its peak, it's going to employ over 1,200 union workers. And once it becomes operational late 2017, it will provide $40 million in additional tax revenues annually just to the local county government. How would Cleveland like to get all of a sudden an extra $40 million in tax revenues from one project? That is if we get full approval. But this facility, like other big energy projects, has become something of a cause célèbre for those who categorically oppose all fossil fuels and anything related to them. And I mean anything. We've submitted more than 21,000 pages of information about Cove Point to various regulatory agencies, participated in almost untold federal and state regulatory proceedings, given more than 50 presentations to communities across Maryland, and engaged with everyone regularly about the product through, yes, social media channels. Despite all that, environmental activists have sought to make Cove Point the East Coast version of the Keystone XL pipeline. A poster child for this is a quote from one of the leaders of the environmental community. It's a dirty and dangerous fossil fuel project that benefits no one but, quote, the richest gas tycoons. So I guess the 24 million Japanese customers and millions of Indians and 1,200 union workers in Maryland and their families, all of whom will plainly benefit from this project, are unworthy of consideration. But we're not alone in this. From one side of the country to the other, and down to the Gulf of Mexico, the push is on. There are 40 export facilities that have been proposed in the United States. Most experts think about 6 of them will get built, and Dominion will be one of those. Government forecasts indicate that over the next 2 decades, global natural gas consumption will grow by 80%, with most of the demand coming from the Pacific Basin, Japan, South Korea, China, India, and Indonesia. The Asian market alone is estimated at $150 billion. Today, their leading suppliers are Qatar, Australia, and other parts of Indonesia. Russia understands what this means, perhaps better than we do. That's why President Putin, you all saw this, I'm sure, was with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping shaking hands in Shanghai just last month. Russia signed a 30-year contract to supply natural gas to China, the total value estimated at over $400 billion. The ink was hardly dry on that deal before Japan started thinking about building its own pipeline underneath the Sea of Japan from Russia. Geography explains a lot of this. You can transport natural gas much easier by land than you can by sea, but we do have the technology, the resources, and the know-how to do it. The question is, will we? Will we take advantage of this golden moment, this window of opportunity to become a global energy leader? Will we work to use our abundant energy resources to support our allies in Europe and Asia? It remains to be seen. The public, our country, has important choices to make. And the consequences are going to be great and lasting. Not long ago, Robert McNally, who was Senior Director of International Energy Issues on the National Security Council, made this observation. In World War II, we were the arsenal of democracy. You've heard that expression but many times. World War II, we're the arsenal of democracy. And now, he says, we have a chance to become the arsenal of energy. I hope that proves to be the case. I hope for the sake of American consumers and American businesses that's the case. I hope for the benefit of our allies that's the case. So let me repeat what I said earlier. After decades of scarcity, vulnerability, and dependence, what if someone were to show up and announce a new domestic source of energy, previously unavailable, putting substantially less carbon into the atmosphere, generating incredible amounts of new revenue for American economy, thousands of jobs for American workers, and new prosperity for American communities? Would that not be received as good news? Ladies and gentlemen, something extraordinary has happened. Something historic has happened. We can throw off the economic shackles of energy security. 2 generations of energy dependence could yield to American global leadership, and it is largely thanks to the same brand of American innovation, hustle, and resourcefulness that built cities like Cleveland into greatness. So let us see if America can handle the good news and make the most of it. Thank you very much.
I'm a lot smarter than I was a little while ago. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a special Business Leaders Series program featuring Tom Farrell, CEO of Dominion Resources. We will return to our speaker momentarily for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We encourage you to formulate the questions for our speaker now, and we remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partners are WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. In observation of the holiday next week, there will be no forum on Friday, July 4th. On July 11th, the City Club welcomes Chris Korleski, Director of the Great Lakes National Program Office. For more information about our upcoming forums, to make a reservation or to order a CD or a DVD of today's program, please refer to our website, www.cityclub.org. Today, we welcome guests at tables sponsored and hosted by the Business Leaders Series, including Huntington Bank, Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Falls Communications, the Fredonia Group, IdeaStream, Inside Business, Level 7, Life Bank, Meaden and Moore, and Walter and Haverfield. We also welcome guests at tables hosted by Dominion, Medical Center Company, and URS. Thank you for all your generous support. Now we'd like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including the guest. Holding the microphones today are Marketing and Outreach Specialist Kristen Pianka and City Club intern Spencer Kessel. First question, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to hear your side of this story. And I do hope the City Club will provide the opposite point of view about the fracking industry at some time in the future. I'm one of those people that protests because of the environmental issues. You did mention the risks. They're there, and those of us in the movement know they're there. We study about this all the time. If we were to move to renewables, full speed ahead, not do any more fracking in this country, how long would it take for this country to move to renewable sources of energy, all of them?
100% renewable? Thank you for your question, and I appreciate your concerns about the environmental aspects of fracking, and they are real, and they need to be dealt with. My point of view on it is, and there are other points of view, my point of view on this is that they can be dealt with responsibly. But the question is, how long would it, I believe the question is, how long would it take us in the United States? We stop dealing with fossil fuels. I presume coal, you would include coal probably in that. How long would it take us to transition to 100% renewable resources, wind and solar? I'll be completely frank, ma'am, I don't think that's possible ever with today's technologies. So let me give you one. The fundamental reason is, now, if you included nuclear in what you would allow to be considered to be, let's call them non-emitting sources, say nuclear, wind, solar, that I think would be doable as a source for the United States. I think that would take, my own view, a minimum of half a century to do it. Right now we have 98 nuclear power plants operating in the United States. They produce less than 20% of the energy. Coal produces a little bit under 40%. Natural gas is growing, but the renewable resources today produce about a little bit less than 10% of today's energy. The fundamental problem from the point of view of somebody who has to deliver the electricity instantaneously is you can't store electricity at any large scale. This is a fundamental problem for our industry. You can, your cell phone, which I know you were all instructed to turn off, and I hope I turned mine off. That's about as efficient a battery as you have. You cannot store large amounts of electricity on a large scale. The reason why fossil fuels and uranium we have used them for the last 100 years is because there's an enormous amount of energy packed in a very small thing, a lump of coal, a molecule of gas. Relatively easy to extract from the ground, pretty easy to transport to a large central power station, very efficient, and then it can be distributed out over transmission lines, etc. Renewable sources, wind and solar, are very useful, but the problem is the energy is very diffuse. So it takes a significant amount of wind, actually, not just a little bit of wind, to turn a 2 megawatt plant, windmill, and solar panels. And the other thing I mentioned a little bit is the vast amount of land that they take up. Solar panels, 50 acres of land, under 5 megawatts. Gas-fired plant, 25 acres of land, 1,300 megawatts, 670 times as much power. So it's about, what I advocate, our company has advocated for many years, is a balance of these resources. But to be able to, the short answer, very long answer, I apologize. The short answer to your question is, in my opinion, the United States, with today's technologies, you cannot power the United States on renewable resources.
So, excuse me, thanks for your remarks. I have a comment on your comparison of the solar farm to the power plant. You need to include the geographic footprint of the wells and the pipelines as well to make that an apt comparison. I think it's still a good comparison, but you need the total equation. My question has to do with distributed energy. What is Dominion doing with this concept of gas to the home or the neighborhood and fuel cells scattered around the landscape?
Thank you for that. You're quite correct. Obviously, you have a chain associated with getting the energy source to where the power plant is. I would only comment that the pipelines are underground and the wells are underground, so you still have all of the above ground land resource available, which you do not have with renewables. But with respect to so-called distributed generation, there are many forms of distributed generation, not just fuel cells. Fuel cells are a good, they're getting much better. Actually, Dominion owns the largest fuel cell array in the United States. It's in Connecticut, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Powers some buildings at the University of Connecticut. They're quite expensive, but you do use natural gas, but there's no combustion. So you don't have the release of the carbon dioxide. You separate the atoms, the molecules, through a chemical process. But they're relative to other sources of power, relatively inefficient. But they are getting better. Other forms of distributed generation are rooftop solar. You can put solar panels on your rooftop. The ultimate potential game changer would be to take smaller fuel cells and let you put them in your backyard, for example, and fuel your house. But they rely on natural gas. Okay, so there's that huge infrastructure around that you point out about getting the natural gas out of the ground and delivered. All of these sources have trade-offs. Coal has lots of things about it that make people uncomfortable, but it is a tremendous producer of electricity at efficient prices. It has lots of trade-offs. Solar has no pollution associated with it, but it takes up a huge amount of land, and it only runs about 30-35% of the time, depending where you are in the United States. If you're in Arizona, you'll get sunlight almost, most of waking hours. Trouble is you can't store the electricity. So once the sun goes down, power goes down. It's produced quite a bit of problems actually in California, where people are installing it on their rooftops in what we would call utility scale solar, this 50-acre facility I'm speaking of. Actually managing the grid, I'm not an engineer, so I'm repeating what I've learned, but managing the grid, the electric grid, is a very complex exercise because the electricity has to be used instantaneously with its creation and vice versa. So as you start the day, it's relatively mild outside on let's use a hot summer day. It's the easiest for people to understand. Wake up in the morning, it's relatively mild. Turn on your coffee pot, maybe the morning news. You go to your office, all this, you're going from a level here of power usage, and it starts growing as the day goes along. And as it gets hotter and hotter, you're running the air conditioner, cycling your air conditioners more and more. So you're using more and more and more electricity, and then when the sun goes down, it begins to cool off, and you start decreasing the amount of electricity. So as you go through that, what engineers would call a peak, you have to turn on a variety of power plants. So you got one set of power plants on all the time, take care of that base usage, and then as the power usage goes up, you have to turn on power plants because you have to use it instantaneously. You can't have the electricity produced and not being used because you can't store it. And the same thing's true, if you overproduce, you'll burn up all the wires. So you have to constantly be matching demand. It's a very complex exercise. And when you have a bunch of intermittent sources, one of the things, nuclear, coal plant, gas-fired plant, you know exactly what they're going to produce and when they're going to produce it. Solar, wind, it's an intermittent source. The wind is blowing and then the wind dies. Quite seriously, if you're producing solar power and cloud goes overhead, the production value of that solar panel will go down. And that puts an instantaneous, it's fine if you don't have but so much of it. But when you have a lot of penetration of it, it can affect the way the grid is managed. So it's requiring lots of new technologies. And we'll get them. We'll figure it out. We're Americans. We'll always figure this out.
Mr. Farrell, you spoke today at great length about the benefits of fracking. This question relates to some of the negatives about fracking, the dangers to the environment and also the dangers to the personal health of people who are close to the fracking area. Fracking involves going very deep underneath the surface of the earth. It involves millions of gallons of water, thousands of gallons of very strong chemicals, including some that are toxic and some that are carcinogenic. And what can the industry do to assure Americans that by fracking, there will not be damage to the environment nor damage to the health?
Those are perfectly good questions. I'm not sure I've heard about carcinogens in the fracking fluid. I'm not disputing you. I've just not read that myself. Or the toxic nature. I haven't seen that. I'm not disputing you, sir. But all that said, everything else I agree with you completely. You're going deep. Utica Shale is like 10,000 feet deep, almost 2 miles deep. Now there's an advantage to that in that you're way below the water table. You're way below the water table. So whatever you're doing down there is not going to intersect with the water table. Marcellus is about 2,000 feet higher, still thousands and thousands of feet below the water table. So you put fluids in there. What you're doing when you're fracking, for those, maybe I should have said, maybe you all don't exactly understand what it means. What you're doing is you drill a well. Here's what makes it economically viable to get the gas out of the rock. Normally, if you do a conventional well, that's why they call it, Steve referred to as unconventional. A conventional gas well that we would drill in the Appalachian Mountains for 100 years is you just simply, you drill straight down and there's holes in the pipe and the gas flows into the holes in the pipe and then comes up the pipe. Shale formations, it is much more tightly compressed. So to get the gas to flow at an economic rate, you do what they call horizontal drilling. As you go down, one well bit can go down to the zone, and then you go out vertically from the bottom of that well. So that you can actually drill 6, 8, 10 wells with one drill bit. And then you want to fracture the rock. You're not literally fracture, these are microscopic fractures that you're fracking the rock with fluid under pressure. That makes the gas flow much more economically, and that's why you're able to do this recovery. We've been doing fracking since the 1940s. So this is not a new technology, but it was where gas prices got to made it economically viable. So yes, you have to get that water, you get those fluids back up out of the ground, and that's what they do. They get them back up out of the ground, and they have to be properly disposed of. Absolutely. No responsible person would disagree with you. But it can be done, and it has been done for 50, 60 years. There are people who don't do it responsibly, and they need to be found and fined, and they have to learn how to do it right.
Mr. Farrell, you used the term our energy advantage. I call that having extra money in my wallet to spend on other things.
Like movies.
Yes, movies.
I like this question.
Cleveland games, whatever. So what's Dominion doing and what can I do to get the truth out about our energy advantage?
Well, one of the things, thank you for the question. One of the things we should be doing is people like me, like you, should be talking to our neighbors. We should go to forums like this. Look, there's nothing wrong with having this debate. This city club is formed for that purpose, for which I applaud you. Nothing is perfect. None of the sources of energy are perfect. We just need to be honest with each other and make sure everybody understands all of the facts. You cannot power the United States with renewable power. Maybe somebody will figure out something in a garage. I hope they do. That created Apple computers. I hope somebody figures that out. I hope somebody figures out how to separate the carbon dioxide molecules without having the idea of storing them underground is a much worse idea than fracking, in my opinion. So technologies will have to change. But in the meantime, if we're still going to have the lights on in the city club, and if you're going to stay warm in your house using East Ohio Gas's distribution system, we're going to have to extract these fossil fuels out of the ground safely, reliably.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. So, I mean, it seems like we can agree that there are some serious risks with fracking. We can also sounds like there are a lot of great opportunities as well. You spoke of some ways that it can be dealt with responsibly, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, especially because I think, when it comes to issues, environmental issues related to some sort of activity like this, the problem is when something goes wrong, we're just reacting. There may be serious health issues. It's very often that the population that's affected are poorer and may not have the resources to have legal action or whatever they might need. So what's the role of natural gas companies in alleviating that?
It's a very good question. The biggest problem that I've read about, you may have read about something different, but the biggest problem I've read about is, and we don't do fracking ourselves, by the way. We deliver the gas that's been produced. We transport it. Is dealing with the waste, the water, the fluids, when they come back up out of the ground. They have to be treated. They have to be trucked off, taken to a water treatment facility, and treated. But we do that every day. Every community in the United States has water treatment facilities. This is not rocket science. We know how to treat the water. It has to be done responsibly. And there are cases, and they're the ones that get all the publicity. Remember, there were 45,000 wells drilled last year in the United States. 45,000 wells drilled. Did you hear about 44,995 of them? No. You heard about 5. But that's a problem. That's a problem. When those 5 do that, the other wells have a problem. I just want to say one last thing about distributed gen, because you reminded me of this. There's an issue around this. Distributed gen today, it's very expensive. So the people who can afford it are the people that get it. And the people who can't afford it are the ones that are left behind to pay in the utility rate structures for the people who have left. So it's a whole nother issue that we don't have time to deal with today. But it is a grossly unfair economic issue, the way the things are set, in my opinion, the way things are set up now in tariff structures. And they told me before I came in here, if he stands up here, that I'm supposed to. So, Steve, thank you.
It's obvious this could go on for quite a while. I think he's been doing some professorial work too. Today at the City Club, we've been listening to a special Business Leader Series program featuring Tom Farrell, CEO of Dominion Resources. Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And the program is now adjourned.